At the end of the last class, we went ahead and we set up white noise when we went and deployed onto Heroku. The reason we did this was because we wanted to serve the static assets that Django gives us in the admin, as well as the static assets that the Django REST framework provides in the Browsable API. This includes CSS, JavaScript, a few images, and all of that, and it simply makes for a nicer browsing experience, whether you're in the admin or in the Django REST framework Browsable API. We are set up to serve static content, but we haven't actually gone ahead and taken advantage of it ourselves. Right now, our site doesn't have CSS or images or anything of the sort. So what we're going to do in this lesson is we're going to see how we can begin to take advantage of something that we've already set up and the way we plug into the static file system provided by Django. So in my terminal, I'm in the project, and if I cd into src, you will see that there are two new directories, specifically the static content and the static root. Both of these have a whole host of basic content. You can see that I have a CSS directory with normalize, skeleton CSS, and so neither of these are programmed by me, and then style.css. Style.css is a set of basic styles that override some of the stuff within Skeleton. I would like to note right here and now that this is a class on backend web development in Python. You should not be using the CSS that I am providing as any sort of guide. It is not particularly modern CSS, and it is not what I would use in production. What's more is in production, you would want to have a pipeline that takes all three of these and combines them into a single bundle. That's a little bit beyond the scope of this class. I would recommend you take a look at something like Django Compressor, or else to handle it far in advance of when you are bundling things with Django. I hear very good things lately about Tailwind CSS from a few other developers, and then there's always all of the JavaScript and post-CSS pipelines available to you should you decide to go that route as well. Lots of choices. Meanwhile, back in our terminal, we also see that I've added a logo and an RSS PNG, which we'll use later on in this lesson. Now, I've also added a few items in static root. So we can take a look at static root. And you can see that I have a flat directory here of a whole host of items that we would expect to be in the root directory of our website. Now, because we have a dynamic web application, this concept of a root directory that you can access doesn't make a whole lot of sense for us, right? All of our roots or routes, or however I'm supposed to be pronouncing that, are completely dynamic. Right? There is no such thing as having a favicon or a robots.txt in a root directory at the front of our web application, because there is no such thing as sort of a serving by directory. We are nonetheless going to want to serve things as if they were in the root, and so that is going to be something that we set up very shortly, and I'm simply putting all of that information right in there. Now, what we're going to want to begin to tackle is letting Django know about these directories. So if we come over here, you can see that in settings base, I've gone down into the static files section. We had previously defined static root, static URL, and the static file storage. I have gone ahead and added the static files directory, which will direct Django to the static content. You'll notice that I'm also using white noise here to set the white noise root setting, and we're pointing it at static root. And that is really all we need to do right there to make sure that all the content we saw in the static root directory gets served up as if it were in the root directory path of our web server. And we'll see that in action in just a second. So that is all we sort of had to add to take advantage of local files on our own. But now we would like to be able to use them in our templates. So I'm going to open my second buffer here where I've already loaded the src templates base. You can see I've done a few things, mostly all in the head here of our HTML. I've added the link to a style sheet, and here I'm using static CSS normalize, right? So I'm saying I don't actually know where this is being stored, right? There is no real directory path here. It's some place that Django knows of, and I'm asking Django to please go get this static directory to be able to point to it as a path so that when the browser shows up, we can give them a path that Django, or white noise in this case, will then be able to recognize and respond to. So we do that a few times for normalize, skeleton, and style, and again, production setting, you would want to be trying to combine these in some way. I'm also adding the various links for the favicons, Apple Touch icons, and all of that. The site that I've been using for years at this point to be able to generate all of that correctly is the Real Favicon Generator. I highly recommend it. It makes my life much easier when I'm setting these things up. I no longer know that it's necessarily the bleeding edge, but I see that they update it fairly routinely, and that they stay, pretty up to date about what's going on with the various touch icons and whatnot. So, we're now covered for not only browsers, but also iOS devices, Android devices, even Windows mobile phone devices. This is configured for Microsoft applications over here. And with that done, we should now be seeing a whole host of behavior here. Now, because I'm including style and skeleton, I've actually also gone down into this template and loaded a couple classes via HTML classes. So now you see I've introduced divs where I have a row, and this is from skeleton, 12 columns, also from skeleton, and then have gone ahead and styled my own messages. I've made sure that success gets a nice color when it's displayed, and again, we can see that, and just kind of given it all of the layout that you might expect. I haven't bothered to go through and add all of this to the other templates, but we'll do that by the end of lesson 5. If you're familiar with static files and loading static files in Django, you may have noticed that there is something missing in the templates. There is usually, when you are trying to load static files, the need to ask for the static files loader, the actual template tags. You have to issue this command at the very top of your templates that are going to go ahead and get them. And in my case, I actually have gone and removed this because I find that I either forget it or I'm using it in so many places that it feels incredibly repetitive. One of the nice things about Django is that you can go ahead and you can provide built-in template tags where you simply say, no, I want these included by default. So you can see that I've removed here in this change the static files template tags, and I've simply said, yep, go ahead and include them whenever we are rendering templates by default. It's something to simply draw your attention to, and in the event in particular, you looked at this and you said, well, wait a second, where is he loading the static files? That's how I'm actually doing it. I've moved into the browser where you can see I've started our server, and you can see that this is a completely different world. We now have a whole set of styles. We identify the footer. Our nav bar is a little more prominent, and we have the ability to prominently see where I can organize my account. We can also see that signals now have their own very bright messaging. So this is what it looks like upon success. And if I go back and log in again, we see that it is very clear when I go ahead and log in as my account. As you can see, most of the work here is actually done in the CSS, which again this class is not meant to be about CSS. Please don't use it as a guideline. Please refer to people who are CSS specialists on that front. But with very little work within Django, we've gone from a site that looked especially bare bones to something that is a little bit less bare bones and a little bit easier to navigate.